evening, everyone, and welcome to the Real Science Exchange, the pubcast where leading scientists and industry professionals meet over a few drinks to discuss the latest ideas and trends in animal nutrition. Hi, I'm Scott Sorrell, one of your hosts here tonight at the Real Science Exchange, and we're excited to be back in the virtual pub with one-of-a-kind experts in methane emissions. And I'm really looking forward to the conversation tonight about how we can mitigate emissions going forward. Tonight, we welcome two professionals to discuss enteric methane emissions. Dr. Joe McFadden, you're no stranger to the Real Science Exchange. You actually appeared on episode number 3, believe it or not, and that was one that's been a very popular episode. I looked at it earlier today, and there's been over 1,500 downloads, so very popular. And it's also hard to believe that we're already at number 65, and by the time this drops, we'll be at 66. So, Joe, since this is not your first time here, you know the drill, so what's in your glass tonight?
Oh, I have a special treat for you, okay? I know that you have been doing this podcast, you said 60 episodes or something. I said, I gotta bring the best drink you've ever seen, okay? So I'm bringing it, okay? Here it is. And we're going to show it to you, all right? And what this is, a 50-50 blend of whiskey, and guess what? New York pure maple syrup that Joe McFadden produced at my sugar bush. My first season producing maple, and there it is. It tastes amazing. And to make this even better, okay, because I said that's not good enough. I gotta step it up a notch. When I walked out the door this morning, there was a big icicle hanging from a maple tree, a sugar maple. I ripped that off, and I put that in the back of my truck, which is full of about a foot of snow, and that icicle is in the glass right now. So this is it.
That is awesome. That may be our best story so far, Joe. Yeah, thank you for that. You know, I've got a bit of a story as well. Back on episode number 3, we noticed while we were, or at least I noticed, that you kept draining your glass. You'd empty it, then you'd set it down, and then a little bit later you'd drain it again. We're like, what's going on? We found out afterwards that your wife was there filling it up. So
yeah, she was running. I live in my old house. She was running up and down the stairs and filling my glass for me because I would just keep drinking it. A little bit different. My wife's not here today, but I am in a work environment enjoying my beverage.
Well, that's good. Yeah, just don't let anybody know. All right, very well. So, Joe, I see you've brought another guest with you tonight. Would you mind introducing Peri for us real quick, and how'd you get to know her?
Yeah, this is Dr. Peri Rosenstein from the Environmental Defense Fund. I've had the privilege of working with Peri now for about a year on a couple different projects. I think it'd be better just to let Peri describe sort of her background and what she's currently doing with the Environmental Defense Fund, and also what is EDF? That'd be helpful.
Yeah, sure. Great.
Thanks, Joe, and it's a pleasure to be here. So I'm Senior Scientist of Livestock Systems at the Environmental Defense Fund. The Environmental Defense Fund is an international organization that addresses the biggest environmental challenges. And our philosophy is to build a vital earth for all, which we aim to do by finding solutions that address these environmental issues while supporting economic development. And we do this by combining science, economics, partnerships, and advocacy. And we're targeting the climate crisis through both mitigation and adaptation strategies. And this is certainly true for livestock. And that takes me to what we're talking about today. So with livestock, our focus is on enteric methane emissions as well as manure management when it comes to methane, although there are a lot of other ways that livestock may be connected to the climate. And the strategies that we're looking at are oftentimes different by region and production system. And we can get into some more of that today.
Oh, awesome. It's glad to have you here, Peri. So the same as Joe's drill, what's in your glass tonight?
Well, I have a large beer mug here of some hard cider from New Jersey.
That's
awesome. What I'm doing today.
Dr. Zimmerman, he's usually our co-host. He's going to be very envious of that. And finally, I can't forget to introduce my co-host tonight. We're bringing back Dr. Ken Sanderson once again from the Balchem team. Ken, thanks for joining us tonight. And you drinking anything special?
Well, Scott, I've resorted to my usual podcast beverage, which is Molson Canadian.
I wouldn't expect anything less, Ken.
And I like that maple leaf, Ken. Okay,
that's good.
It's perfect.
We
it's
love
in keeping with your theme, Joe. So
excellent.
Yeah, awesome. And tonight, I've got an old standby. I've got a Woodford's, but I did pour a double. It's been that kind of week so far, guys. So anyway, in the spirit of the pub, let's raise a glass. Cheers,
Okay.
everyone.
Cheers, everybody. Cheers.
Cheers.
I'm not going to have much left here in about 10 minutes. Let's get going.
We'll break and let you fill up again. So
Okay.
no worries.
Tonight's pubcast stories are brought to you by Reassure Precision Release Choline. Reassure is the most researched encapsulated choline on the market today, consistently delivering results to your transition cows of higher peak milk, reduced metabolic disorders, and even in utero benefits to her calf, leading to growth and health improvements. Visit Balchem.com to learn more.
So, Joe, you had a terrific webinar back in March during the Real Science Lecture Series. To date, we've had more than 600 people that have listened to the live recording or the recording that we've put out on YouTube. The title of that talk was Mitigating Enteric Methane Emissions. How can we speed up progress? What do you think made that webinar so popular with folks?
Well, obviously it's a hot topic. People want solutions and they want them now. I think, but there's so many unanswered questions. And so, what I really enjoyed about this process, and for those that really know me in my research program over the last decade now, I didn't start out as an enteric methane guy. And when I came to Cornell, though, there was a lot of opportunity to grow the program, to explore other interests, and I realized that this is a real unique chance for me to sort of study the field, not having sort of any prior not having any bias, and just making sort of a broad sort of review of what works and what doesn't, and that would really position me well, I thought, to think about how my research program is going to evolve here in the future. So that particular seminar was sort of the culmination of that effort, where I took time to talk to the experts in the field over the last few months. There's about 20 plus scientists from across the world to gain their insight. And I really wanted to share that insight and share that experience that I had, and not just to help sort of my own progression, but to help the scientific community as a whole sort of think about what we need to address in the short term to get to meaningful impact.
All right, very well. Kind of as an overview, right? Farting cows get a lot of clicks, on social media, but in reality, how much contribution does the food production system have in terms of generating greenhouse gases? How does it compare to some of the other generators?
Yeah, as a percentage of total greenhouse gas emissions, particularly methane, is a major. Enteric methane is a major contributor in terms of agricultural food production. I don't think there's going to be much debate there, especially from ruminants, beef and dairy cattle. But as a percentage of total, when you look at total greenhouse gas emissions on the basis of CO2 equivalents, emissions from livestock are quite low. And this raises a lot of arguments about what should we focus on. Should we really be focused on enteric methane mitigation? Well, my argument there is that methane is definitely a climate pollutant. It has a high potency relative to carbon dioxide. And, I see this from a slightly different perspective. I think about this from the fact that methane itself represents sort of lost energy, right? This is a form of energy that's being released by the cow that could be potentially retained for other purposes. Now, that's easier said than done for a variety of reasons, but when we try to think about efficiency of meat or milk production, we really want to capture as much possible gross dietary energy to make meat and milk. And if we have an opportunity here to reduce methane, then potentially we have the opportunity to conserve that energy for meat and milk production, which is only going to benefit the farmer, and it can benefit the cow as well, potentially. So to the critics in the world, I argue that if dairy and beef production can be part of the solution and reduce methane emissions from our atmosphere, but it's simultaneously enhancing sort of the success of our industries, and we should do it. We absolutely should do it.
Joe, you've been recently featured in some high-profile publications, The Hill and Time Magazine, and you were defending the dairy industry. Can you talk a little bit to us about what you talked about in those articles?
I never thought I'd be doing this if you asked me 5 years ago. Again, Cornell provided a lot of opportunities for enhanced visibility. And, I think the definition of what an animal scientist is needs to evolve with time. And we have this debate in our own department when I talk to my colleagues at various stages of their career. And, I think we have to really advocate for our industry. And we have to make sure that we do a good job being transparent about, what works and what doesn't. The industry is not perfect. These beef and cattle industries are not perfect. No industry is. But I think scientists have sort of responsibility to help clear the narrative, to address misconceptions. And that's difficult to do. If you ask any scientist, that should be difficult to do. We're trained to be scientists. Right? We're trained to communicate as scientists, but we're not really trained to communicate to the average Joe at the grocery store. Okay, we're not trained to do that. I have a personal interest into be a better communicator to all, not just scientists. I think, and by doing so, I hope that I can address some of the misconceptions. So the articles in The Hill and in Time were there to, one, focus on this debate regarding the natural carbon cycle, and that maybe we shouldn't be focused on dairy and beef production because of that. And then the most recent ones were on seaweed. Is it really the solution? Maybe we need to sort of be more transparent about what doesn't work potentially with seaweed feeding and enteric methane. And then the Time one was focused on what are the current barriers to really expedite real meaningful solutions for various production systems across the world. And so I really just want to put it out there and showcase that we can do better, and we are doing better, and the future looks bright.
Yeah, good.
And if I might add, I do think it's really important to recognize the strides that have been made towards improving sustainability and efficiency in the industry already. And so this is looking at extending solution sets that are both beneficial to farmers as well as improving the condition for the climate.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Perry's right. I mean, in terms of just look at Europe, look at the U.S. I mean, efficiency looks phenomenal. Look at Canada, Ken. Okay, you got your beer there. But how do we make those gains in efficiency, gains in sustainability efforts translate across various production systems? I think it's really important. And Peri and I are really focused heavily on in South Asia, specifically India. We have several efforts, both collaborative and non-collaborative, where we're trying to think about how to help farmers at every scale of production be better farmers, but also protect the environment at the same time.
Joe, so Peri mentioned that we've made a lot of progress so far. I'm sure there's a lot more progress to be made. What are some of the near-term things that we've done to create that progress?
This isn't this for all those that are probably listening to this podcast. They already realize this, but it's management, genetics, and nutrition. I mean, those are the top three that have really enhanced efficiency. That's great for the U.S. It's great for Europe. But how do you do that in countries with 75 million plus smallholder farmers? Like, how do you do that? That is not easy to do. And the only reason why we have done it is we've dramatically changed our production system. And that direction of change is not going to be applicable to every country that has a developing country, countries with emerging economies. It's not going to be directly applicable. So we can't ignore them because we're trying to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions, and they're a significant contributor. We'll leave it at that.
Yeah, no, but let's talk about that, right? You guys decided to focus on India. And you said there's a lot of progress to be made there.
Yes.
And so how'd you pick India or Southeast Asia?
This all started with the Environmental Defense Fund. I blame them. for changing my research program a bit. And it's a good blame. I really enjoy this. But Environmental Defense Fund came to Cornell. There was a couple of representatives that came, and they just brought this to my attention. It's something that I realized I never put a lot of thought into it, but they said, hey, India is going to be soon the most populous country in the world. It has 75 million smallholder dairy farmers. They have over 300 million cattle and buffalo. I put this in perspective. We're talking about 9 million dairy cows in the United States with, I think, just under 40,000 farmers. This is a crazy difference, okay? And that India itself produces about 22% of total global dairy production, right? And they're doing it using this production system. It also is a high producer of methane in terms of all the countries on the planet. And certainly enteric fermentation, rice production contribute to this. So I thought, well, hey, a lot of ruminants, high hairy dairy production state, what can we do? And how can we help? And it's not about going over and trying to, say, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. It's about going over, learning from them, learning about what the industry is currently doing, and trying to work with them to help them to be a little bit better. And so in this process, I had a chance to travel to Gujarat and Bangalore, India, with the team from EDF in late 2022. And in that process, we had a chance to meet with the National Dairy Development Board, or NDDB. This is a governing authority that has a heavy influence over dairy production practices across India. And they have a very well-developed sort of extension network where they can educate farmers at this small sort of production level. Every farmer is producing maybe 1 to 5 animals. It's not very large. And so we're asking, what can we do? How can we contribute? Well, the National Dairy Development Board had initiated a ration balancing program. This is a program to help enhance the utility of ration balancing for Indian dairy farmers. And so I said, okay, maybe we can help here. We have obviously the home of the CNCPS, Cornell Net Carbohydrate and Protein System, and how can we contribute? And so with working with Peri, we've developed a sort of a concrete plan moving forward here to, one, better understand feed chemistry throughout India. It's a difficult challenge. It's a lot of states, a lot of terrain to cover, but we're going to work systematically here, starting with a pilot study in Gujarat to really go out, talk to a couple hundred smallholder farmers, learn about the feeds that they're feeding, collect feed samples, work with a commercial lab to fully define the nutrient profile using contemporary approaches, and then integrate that within our sort of CNCPS nutrition model with the help of my colleague and mentor, Dr. Mike Van Amberg. And in the process, once we have that information, we'll go out and work with that village, and we're actually going to do an actual study where we're going to look at the status quo versus follow the feeding recommendation we provide based on that feed chemistry data that we have. And we're going to do an 8-week intervention, and we're going to see what happens. And you know what? We realize that adherence is not going to be great, but in this process, we're going to learn about what works and what doesn't in terms of adherence. We want to be able to identify those barriers, and so we can close them.
So I've been to India as well, right? And I've seen those small farms, and to me, they look just desperately inefficient. So to me, it seems like if you really want to make an impact, we need to move away from those small farms, and maybe I'm just a little bit North America centric, but to move to larger, more efficient, more productive animals, and that's the real way to make progress.
I disagree with you, Scott. Got to disagree with you here, big time.
Yeah.
Because I had the same mentality when I went over there.
Right.
I mean, before I went over there, I had the same mentality. Like that is an American mentality. If I had to say, that's probably what we think. But when you go over there, you see how important producing milk is for each individual farmer. To them, this is their way of life. It's every night they go, they drop off the milk, they get paid for it. Yeah. A significant portion of their income. You've got 75 million people in in India, producing dairy. That's a way of life. And so I think enhancing the efficiency of the smallholder production setting ensures that their net daily income goes up. They're going to have better nutrition. Obviously, we all know milk's a nutrient-dense food. And I think they're going to be better off for that. And when you talk to those folks, you talk to the folks at NDDB, National Dairy Development Board, or we talk to the farmers, this is their way of life. It's not going to change. It is unreasonable for us to sort of say, hey, let's go reduce the ruminant population. It's not going to happen, right? So I'll leave it at that.
No, I get it.
Yeah, I have to echo what Joe said. Cattle are a way of life, and they are a source of food security, nutritional security, and deeply connected to their livelihoods. And so certainly the goal is not to change what they're doing, but to contribute in whatever way we can to help them optimize the productivity of their cattle through animal nutrition, animal health, and breeding strategies. And a lot of that work is being done on the ground there. And the goal is to see what we can add to that conversation.
Yeah, I completely understand and appreciate that. I learned when I was over there, one of the first foods that the infants are given after birth is cow's milk. And, it really is part of their culture and part of who they are. So, no, I applaud you guys for your work there.
It's very much advancing. So I thought, hey, there's very little information about the production system over there, but they're attempting to register every single sort of farm system. So every animal can be identified, on a database. I've seen a database that a mule had, which is one of their major milk unions over there. And they pull up an individual farmer. They know when the animal was last bred. They know what the milk component test was, which gets evaluated every evening at the collection center. So data integration is there. I see it happening, and it's only going to get better. There's also cool stuff on sort of using sort of biogas sort of collection sort of on farm. And so they can use that as a fuel for a cooking fuel, but also use the slurry to create fertilizer. So they're using innovative sort of practices like that to give the farmer extra income. So I can't wait to see what happens.
Yeah. I want to change directions on you guys just a little bit. I consider Cornell being on the cutting edge of understanding methane emissions from dairy cattle. You've been putting in some new facilities there, and I wanted to give you guys an opportunity to talk about that. Exactly what are you putting in, and what will you be doing with it?
Well, there's so much going on. I mean, I'm not just trying to hype everybody up about this, but I'm just rather state the facts. A couple of years ago, I had a chance to acquire support for respiration chambers. So that really kicked it off. And so we actually just, I think, picked the contractor at a meeting on Friday to talk about the contractor we picked. And that construction is supposed to start next month and conclude by October. There's 4 respiration chambers, completely climate controlled, feed and water intake in real time. We can go from 30 degrees Fahrenheit to 105 degrees Fahrenheit, highly programmable. We can measure all the gases we want to be concerned about: CO2, hydrogen, methane, ammonia, nitrous oxide, and also oxygen consumption. And so we think this is a real pivotal tool for us to really think about the next, of next version of CNCPS nutrition model, but also allow us to position us well to test the next solutions that reduce enteric methane. In addition, that momentum led to the acquiring various green feed units for our farm. We continue to grow that number. We're currently at 3. We anticipate acquiring more here in the near future. Also expanding our ability to do individual intake measurements. We're currently right around 120 cows that we can measure individual intake on. I anticipate getting that up to around 160 to 180 cows for the number of production trials that we have planned. We're going to need it. But most importantly, which I was stunned. Yesterday I found out about this. The Cornell College of Agriculture and Life Sciences had this proposal submission request called Moonshots. And in there, faculty could propose faculty positions for their department. There was 29 proposals. My proposal was one of, I think, 8 that was approved. And it focuses on greenhouse gas emissions and reducing them from livestock production. And there was 3 specific faculty positions that we will now recruit for. The one is a ruminant microbiology sort of position, focused in part on enteric methane. So we really need a microbiologist here at Cornell. We don't have one, to be honest with you. We don't have one right now that's a true microbiologist. And as we start to study these various feed additives in greater depth, we really want to be able to understand their modes of action. Number 2 position is somebody focused in the global development arena. So we really want somebody focused on developing countries that can enhance sustainable livestock production in those countries and identify the challenges and solutions. And so, yeah, we're taking this to heart. I mean, we're focused on India, but now we have somebody else coming on board that's going to focus on a different country. We're taking this serious. And number three, somebody that's going to be in our Dyson School and CALS focused on dairy economics. And so really focus on the carbon credit system, which will be a later hire. But those three positions are coming on board, which is pretty exciting for us.
Yeah. Are those units, Joe, are they operating now?
In terms of the chambers?
Yeah.
Now, I just said the construction of those units are going to conclude in October, and we hope to be operational by the end of the year.
All right. You mentioned a little bit about funding. Initially, can you talk about the funding and maybe give you an opportunity to give a little commercial for asking folks for a few more dollars?
Well, I think we want to be strategic about how we use the support. And so as we identify demands, we really want to identify strategic partners for that support. But, we've acquired close to about $2 million in support, I think just over that right now, from New York State, Genesee Valley Regional Market Authority, from our own college, from Cargill, and Balchem Corporation has also been a gracious sponsor. And how that will evolve in the future, time will tell. But yeah, the funding doesn't go wasted. Unfortunately, when you go renovate a facility, do a lot of demolition, rip up concrete, and install an HVAC, it's not cheap. But we found a path forward to pull it off.
Yeah, very well. I'd like to transition a little bit to talking about some of the items that you talked about in the webinar. Of all the challenges that you described in the webinar, what do you see as the number one priority right now, and how do we address it?
Yeah, so it's hard for scientists sometimes to say just one thing. But feeding duration is really important when you talk about feed additives that reduce methane. I'm guilty of this myself. We just did our first sort of green feed study using the green feed technology, and it's a short feeding trial, 3 weeks. But I think for some of these feed additives, we've got to expand beyond 3 months in terms of feeding duration, and that's a little difficult to do. One, you need a lot of animals per treatment to pull that off. It needs to be in a controlled setting. But there's a lot of, I think, interest to understand a lot of questions that relate to duration. So, for example, how does efficacy change with time? How does efficacy change with energy balance of the animal? How does it change with sort of diet in the animal? As you talk about an animal that goes from gestation to lactation, gets different diets. How does that influence efficacy? What happens when you decide to change an ingredient in a diet? What happens when you, if you lose efficacy after a couple weeks or months, how can you restore it or maintain that reduction with alternative additives? So looking at co-supplementation and replacement strategies are really needed. So long duration feeding trials are needed, absolutely needed. They're not easy to do. Grad students don't like them, but they got to be done.
When you say long, how long? Or the full lactation?
We're talking on the short end, 3 months. The short end. I think, but yeah, full lactation, absolutely. We also need to think about full lifespan of an animal, right? And so there's a lot of interest to look at things that go on early on in life, and so you can do something for a couple of weeks and has a long-term benefit. I think there's a lot of research that needs to go on there that just hasn't been talked about or just evaluated. But also the other production systems, right? We're so focused on confined dairy management styles. It's easy to do, give consistent delivery of the additive, but we got to think about alternatives for different systems.
Yeah. And if I might add, I completely agree about the challenges with different systems. And I think also at the root of this is the challenge with measurement and making sure we have a standardized way of evaluating these products and figuring out what their actual efficacy is. Certainly, the impacts for safety and health are important too, and that speaks to Joe's comment about long duration studies and lifespan studies. But I think both aspects are really important.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit more about those standards and measurements?
Well,
how are we going to do that?
Well, so this is one of our projects with Environmental Defense Fund, is to explore this exact question. Ananda Fantura, a previous PhD student and postdoc that's leading this effort, she's currently looking at how various tools that measure methane emissions are validated. That's sort of one component of this process. And I'll give you an example. So there's the green feed technology, which we're using it. There's things that we need to study a little bit in greater depth to refine the technology, I believe, but it has a lot of great applicability and accessibility. And there's a lot of science behind it already. But how do you validate a tool like that? We're in India. They're talking about using lasers, like calcite lasers to monitor emissions. How do you validate that? Well, a lot of the science papers that we read, and Ananda's brought to my attention, is that they'll do this. They'll do a validation study where they'll use a methane monitoring tool, and they'll look at how much methane was produced from that animal in a given day, right, in that particular production setting. And then they'll compare that to methane emissions that are being estimated by calculations derived from completely independent chamber trials. All right. And so to say, oh, they're equivalent. But the reality was the environment was different, the diet was different, the animals were different. And so we really wanted to advocate for validating sort of technologies that monitor methane emissions within an individual study. There's going to be more on this coming out in the future from Ananda, but that's a high priority for us. In terms of the health component, we focus so much on percent reduction, right? Oh, 30% reduction, 50%, whatever it is, whatever the number is. That's only one component here. We cannot solve one problem and create another problem, right? And so we can't get too far ahead of ourselves. And so there are technologies that are being discussed that have some concerns regarding sort of their long-term efficacy or their safety. And we've got to be extremely transparent with the consumer about what works and what doesn't, because we can't be in a position 10 years from now where we haven't made any progress because the consumer decided, hey, I don't want that milk because cows were fed that, right? And so that's part of the process too in this, is to really identify a streamlined sort of experimental approach that covers the holistic sort of perspective.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Successful implementation of feed additives as a strategy for enteric methane mitigation will absolutely require products that are effective, but they also have to not cause negative environmental trade-offs, be safe for humans and animals, be widely adopted by the industry, as Joe said, and certainly be accepted by consumers. So all of those boxes have to be checked for us to make an effective strategy.
Yeah, so Peri, just to make sure I've got my mind around this. So right now you guys are working on validating measurement methodology. Now, is this primarily for studies, or is this in preparation for measuring methane emissions at the dairy level? Mm-hmm. Can you expound on that just a bit?
No, I mean, we're very much focused from an academic research perspective, because I think there's a lot of discussion about commercial field trials and what role do they play in this. And I see it firsthand, where I have Zoom meetings with various companies and they tell me, hey, we're working on this new technology and or something that we're talking about already, and we're testing it out at these commercial labs. And it's like, well, why are you jumping to the commercial field trial for? And I have some concerns, but there's some benefits there that we can't ignore. So, for example, a commercial field trial provides you a lot of animals per treatment. I think that's really powerful. It also allows you to look at the health, the disease incidence, right, the fertility, variables that need to be considered. I know very few universities that can do that very well. We just don't have the animal numbers. Maybe that one they're building in Idaho can do it, but I don't think that thing's built yet. But, we're not in the position at Cornell to do that effectively. And so I also think you have to have farmers buy into technology. Like, they have to believe it. They have to trust it. And one farmer telling another farmer, hey, it worked for me, I think goes a long way sometimes. And so doing testing on commercial farms, it really adds to that and really helps support its adoption. And so I think there's a role there. So yeah, from our perspective, we're really focused on how do you do this in a university trial. We're not thinking too hard about the commercial field aspect of this. Some would argue in that exercise where I went out and talked to virtually the various scientists, some would argue we shouldn't even bother measuring methane emissions as a way to define efficacy in a commercial setting. There's just too many variables at play, right? The diets are constantly changing. You can't keep the same number of animals per pen, whatever. There's a variety of potential issues, but just really focus on, the milk production, the fertility and disease, and maybe that's where the value is.
Yeah, but at some point we are going to have to measure it to dairy, right? If we're giving out
Absolutely.
carbon credits, and we're going to have to,
Absolutely. So how
yeah,
do you do that, right? And so we have Cool Farm Tool, something we just had a graduate student present and talk about the way to try to estimate some of the emissions. I've had people, well, we're talking about technologies that can be done, at the parlor level, at the cow level, sort of monitor emissions. I mean, this is it's a bit of the Wild West right now in terms of the technologies that are emerging to do this and do it correctly. I want to take a moment here to also say that our Pro Dairy team just also received funding as part of our growing program here to look at emissions off of manure, right? And so that's also a big concern for a lot of farmers too, to know how are methane emissions changing, or perhaps nitrous oxide emissions off of manure. And so we're going to have the testing capacity now in the next couple months to be able to take manure and look at the emissions off of that. So that's a new development as well.
Yeah, good. Guys, I got to apologize, right? I'm having a ball with this. I'm enjoying this conversation with Joe, but I want to make sure I bring you guys in. Peri, Ken, anything you'd like to ask or contribute to the conversation?
It's always so great to hear Joe and his excitement about this topic. I've been listening to some of this for a while now, so I'm always learning. I think I'm a little curious as you look at, say, the application of additives into a developing market like India. Will there be a place? Can they afford them? How will that get funded for them? There's
Yeah.
a lot of questions around application.
Oh, no, absolutely. And that's why we've already had that independent thinking about, as an additive approach, should that be our priority number one in countries like India? And the answer has been no. It can't be. It can't be ignored. And there are some good work that's being done by a variety of research groups across India looking at dietary feed additives. The additives that I've seen have been more plant extracts, tannins, as solutions that are going to be cheap and affordable. In terms of their application at the smallholder level, I think there's possibility. I mean, those farmers, from what I could see, and granted, I'm hopefully will become an expert. I'm just learning, but from my observations is that farmers can obtain pelleted feed at the collection centers, and so maybe there's an opportunity there to integrate sort of additives in that particular pellet to ensure consistent delivery. But the efficacy for those products, those additives that they're looking at, are quite low. I would argue they're probably in the 5 to 10% range. I haven't closely evaluated any of the science, but I can't imagine it's going to be more than 5 or 10% efficacy in terms of methane reduction. And so that's why we made a conscious decision here to partner with EDF to focus on efficiency, because I think our biggest gains can be made there most rapidly. And we focus more on feed additives in the developed countries like the US, and we do that together. Hopefully we'll be in a better place 10 years from now.
So that quickly leads me, and Peri, this might be for you, because the regulatory environment for approving these additives globally seems to be highly variable. And the US perhaps maybe being one of the more restricted marketplaces for approval and the oversight from the FDA. Can you comment on where that's going to take us and what that looks like?
Absolutely, yes. I think that's a great point. We really need space for innovation in this field and a faster pathway to market. So it is important to identify an expedited regulatory process going forward. Currently, all products with environmental claims, including enteric methane inhibition, are reviewed under the NADA, or New Animal Drug Application process. And it certainly is a long and resource-intensive process, which is important. It's an essential pathway, but we need a faster pathway to market. This is an urgent crisis and a need. That being said, any pathway still has to maintain safeguards for animal health, human health, and the environment generally. CVM has demonstrated their commitment to reevaluating the current regulatory pathway for these products. So we are eager to hear what comes out of that work. That those efforts have been seen in other regions. Canada has a new approach to these products, and Europe has a different approach. But you're right, it does look different by region. And currently, the process in the U.S. is quite long, and so we're hopeful for what comes out of those efforts.
So as you think about the two broad categories, and then I'll leave this subject alone, but the category of inhibitors of the methanogenesis pathway, so 3-NOP maybe being the most understood example, versus rumen modifiers. So all the other things Joe mentioned a few minutes ago, will there be a different regulatory environment for those different categories? Is that how you see that unfolding?
There are several different approaches that CVM could take to re-envisioning the regulatory process for these products. They could open up an existing pathway like the food additive petition process. They could create a new category like what you're describing, a gut modifier category or zootechnical category, more consistent with other regions. Or they could remain in the NADA pathway, but perhaps limit the effectiveness requirements in order to get approval. So there are several different ways that they could navigate the system in order to provide an expedited pathway.
Great, thank you. Scott?
So, Joe, you've got a hard stop here in about 3 minutes, and I'm out of bourbon. So I think with that, we'll call last call. You are as well. All right, very well. We may, this has been a ball, so we may have to do this again because I've got a lot more questions for you guys. But in terms of the last call, and we'll go around and talk to all three of you guys. But what are some things that you'd like to leave with the audience with respect to mitigating methane emissions in the future?
Tonight's last call question is brought to you by NitroSure Precision Release Nitrogen. NitroSure delivers a complete TMR for the rumen microbiome, helping you feed the microbes that feed your cows. To learn more about maximizing microbial protein output while reducing your carbon footprint, visit balchem.com/NitroSure.
So, Ken, let's start with you.
No, I think what's come to light, is the imperative nature of this conversation. It's changed a lot in the last 3 to 4 years, and it's accelerating. And I think for where I'm sitting, looking at the industry and the need to make some of these adjustments, it's never been higher. So the chances of us making some real inroad seems to be also accelerating as we put focus here. So from that standpoint, I think my hat's off to Cornell for the effort Joe's leading and trying to establish some technology standards that we'll have to look for.
Yeah, well said, Ken. Peri, what do you have for us?
Yes, I completely agree about the urgency of the work. And a lot of this conversation touched on how it can take many different forms. Certainly, optimizing productivity is a major area. It increases food security and improves livelihoods while having that co-benefit of reducing methane emission intensities. So I think that's really important in a lot of regions. When we're talking about the U.S. and other similar systems, certainly innovation in this space and the ability to understand the systems and measurement are really integral to making progress.
Yeah, excellent. Joe, we'll give you the final word.
Okay, well, I have two comments. One comment was something I didn't talk too much about, but we sort of overly generalize percent efficacy. We always like to say X percent, but we have to understand that it's likely highly influential by diet, by stage of development, breed of the animal. We don't really understand enough. And so we have to be careful not to overgeneralize. We have to be very transparent about what works and what doesn't with the consumer. That's number two. And number three, I have a call for all people in the sort of the feed manufacturing, feed additive sort of business. Let's start to think about developing countries. The Global Research Alliance did a survey, nearly all of them, it was like 80%, focus their efforts on the developed world and not the developing world. And the efficiency gap's only going to get worse. And so we have to encourage companies to sort of think a little bit, hey, how can I expand my market to those countries? And hopefully I see that opportunity emerge. Thank you. This has been a blast, as always.
Yeah, no, it has been a blast. I've had a lot of fun. And so I want to thank you, Joe and Peri, for joining us. You guys have been great guests. I also want to thank you for, the contributions you have made and will make toward this very timely effort. Ken, you're always a great co-host. Thank you for joining me here this evening. And to our loyal listeners, I want to thank you for coming along for 65 episodes so far and sticking with us for even more to come. We hope you had fun tonight. We hope you learned something. And we hope to see you next time here at the Real Science Exchange, where it's always happy hour and you're always among friends.
We'd love to hear your comments or ideas for topics and guests. So please reach out via email to anh.marketing@balchem.com with any suggestions, and we'll work hard to add them to the schedule. Don't forget to leave a 5-star rating on your way out. You can request your Real Science Exchange t-shirt in just a few easy steps. Just like or subscribe to the Real Science Exchange and send us a screenshot along with your address and t-shirt size to anh.marketing@balchem.com. Balchem's Real Science Lecture Series of webinars continues with ruminant-focused topics on the first Tuesday of every month, monogastric-focused topics on the second Tuesday of each month, and quarterly topics for the companion animal segment. Visit balchem.com/realscience to see the latest schedule and to register for upcoming webinars.